Welcome, everyone. We're going to give everyone just another few moments to join, and then we'll get started. All right. We'll let everyone trickle in, but go ahead and get started. We have reached the top of the hour. Welcome to the Income Lab Masterclass. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I pass it over to Justin. This is a CFP CE event. You may have submitted your CFP ID at the beginning, but also at the end, we have a survey where you can submit that as well. Keep in mind that there is a requirement of at least 50 minutes of attendance for the CE event to get your credit. Also, if you have a question, please submit it in the Q&A, and we will address as many questions as we have time for. The ones that have the most likes will be addressed first. So please keep that in mind. If there's something that one of your peers had submitted and you'd like to hear the answer, please like the question. With that, I will pass it over to Justin and we'll get started.
All right, thank you, Taylor. Thanks everybody for joining us for our third session of the Retirement Income Planning Masterclass with Jason Juhl. Today we're going to be completing our coverage of how to build a plan, the workflow on plan building, and then moving on to discussing monitoring and managing plans. There's a big part of that workflow, which is tax smart distribution planning. And we have 2 sessions coming that will really dive deeply into tax planning. So if you feel that we're giving that very light touch today, that's because you're going to get a lot in sessions 4 and 5. Note also there's a 3-week gap before our next session on May 28th. Between now and then, we'll be sending out some videos with answering some of your questions that we weren't able to get to live. Also, please check out the website for the masterclass. We have all of the materials from past sessions, slides, takeaways, recordings of the sessions. We have some extra videos in there as well. So there's a lot to do when you're not on these sessions with us. So let's just do a quick recap of where we were from session 2. So again, we were walking through the steps to building a retirement income plan, and we talked about how because we're shifting to how much can I spend, what would make changing that a good idea, from this idea of probability of success, which in session 1 we really went over lots of reasons that that's not a great way to talk with clients. We started with the resources plan. It all starts with what can you afford, and that means all the things that you can use to fund your plan. And then we talked about adding things to that resources plan to build what we call a core plan, which is what everything is going to be based off of. So quick review of that. The resources plan is all of your investments and income streams and so on. We also went over some best practices for the investments and the cash flows. And in the core plan, we talked about adding those extra key or mandatory or high importance expenses to the plan. And we talked about how really what you're doing there is you're taking the answer, what can I spend? And you're kind of saying, okay, great, I can spend this much, but actually, what if I group some of that into a final portfolio legacy goal, or a big vacation, or buying a lake house? And so you're adding more itemized goals, and then the plan is still answering the question, okay, but what else can I spend? We also talked here about the difference between those key expenses, which we call other variable expenses, the difference between that and a baseline expense, which is really just a way of taking that, what can I spend number, and sort of, coloring it in a little bit more, showing, okay, this much goes to groceries, this much goes to, gas and so on. So today, we're going to start with the next step once we have a core plan, which is scenario planning. So we really want to make sure we have a good core plan with all of the information that we know for before we get going in scenario planning. And this is, lots of ways to talk about this: scenario planning, A/B testing, and so on. And maybe my first question for Jason will be, can you give us some examples of the kinds of things that you typically find yourself doing at this step in scenario planning?
Absolutely. Yeah. So just to kind of level set, so within our practice, decumulation is really the core of what we do. And it's ultimately the number one reason we garner assets. Typically, our clients are already working with an advisor. They've had an experience. Typically, that's in their accumulation phase. And they come to us for decumulation, right? How to turn their hard-earned money into income. And so scenario planning gives us an opportunity to really reveal our core competency. And it allows us to really win clients, win prospects through building their confidence and trust, and ultimately, like I said, garnering their business. And so scenario planning really shows that, we're listening to our clients, what's important to them and their families, and ultimately demonstrates the value of why they work with us, why they work with you. So scenarios would include, you got your Social Security claiming, you got your pension options. Of course, you're going to have some what if scenarios, long-term care, maybe if you got a health event at the end of plan, and then of course, gifting and giving. So, you think about Social Security, it's a core component. We're fortunate to work with some affluent families, but I think the statistic goes 1/3 of Americans' sole and only income is Social Security. 2/3 of Americans, the majority, the lion's share of their income comes from Social Security. And so claiming options is incredibly important for many folks. And so my understanding is that when Social Security was enacted, there were actually 567 claiming combinations. There aren't as many today because of some different rules and such, but ultimately claiming is still important, and determining if 62 is appropriate, 67 is appropriate, 70 is appropriate. Some of you might be saying, okay, Jason, well, have you actually helped clients pursue Social Security at 62? And the answer is yes. Traditionally, those scenarios would be maybe you got a high income earner and they have a higher Social Security, so we might delay their Social Security until 70. And we've got maybe a younger spouse who earned lower wages, and it can make sense. But at the end of the day, I kind of use a phrase, and that is when I'm working with clients, I just acknowledge that Social Security is a component, and that your neighbor may have started and filed for Social Security at 62, and your cousin may have filed for Social Security at 70. That doesn't necessarily mean you should do the same. So how does it apply to your individual situation, and what's really optimal for you and your family? The same applies to those pension options, right? Lifetime, survivorship, lump sum. You've got the what if scenarios, like buying a vacation home. I actually have helped 6 clients purchase really pursue their retirement dreams of owning a second home just in the last number of months. And so it's whether they buy outright. What's the size of a down payment? How do we structure the loan? Those are a couple what ifs. And then, of course, you got the long-term care, whether they self-insure or whether, they should have some coverage to help cover some of those costs. So you can build those within the scenario planning as well. And typically in that scenario, what we will do is we'll build a long-term care event kind of the last 3 to 5 years of their plan to show the influence of that event. And then last but not least is going to be gifting and giving. You think about gifting and giving, a lot of times in the clients that we work with, legacy is really not an end of life goal of theirs. We use the phrase, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. But the way we think of legacy is being able to actually gift with a warm hand, gift with a beating heart. When your children are in need, when they are younger, when they're maybe not as prosperous in their earning years, and they really need help with that down payment, or childcare, or whatever those costs may be. And so it's super rewarding for our clients to be able to gift and to give while they are alive, to see the charities and their family reap the benefit of those dollars. So those are a few that come to mind, Justin.
Yeah, those are great examples. And it connects back to from the first session of the masterclass talking about, what it is people are hoping to accomplish in retirement, what they want retirement to be all about. And part of that is, building a legacy while they're alive, and letting them know that they can do these things. Or like you said, maybe they have a lifetime dream of that, lake house or something. Those are all great ways to do it. As we're doing this, let me just share kind of in a practical sense how you might do this kind of thing. So here I have a core plan, and best practice is to copy the plan and then just make one or two changes just to see what the effect is of that change. So for example, purposely, I made this a plan where they took Social Security as early as possible. Let's just, and we'll name this plan also. And there you go. So now we have this plan, Social Security at 70, and we'll see the effects of that. And you can evaluate those effects, using, okay, what can I spend? How does that change? You see that it went up. So it was 18.1, and now we're at 19.2, just because we're adding that Social Security, which is adjusted for inflation and so on. But if I added the lake house or added helping the kids with the down payment, the spending capacity would go down. I know we talked about this a little bit, Jason, before. How do you talk with clients about this stage of planning? I know you had some ways to think about it.
Yeah, so planning is really specific to each individual client. No client is the same. And so with this kind of advanced planning, if you will, with these different scenarios, it just allows us to really help clients understand, okay, here's what I'm eligible for. Here's the lifestyle that my resources can support. And then by adding these kind of one-off or what-if type scenarios, it just shows that we're listening. And ultimately it shows that, life can be lumpy and your retirement can be lumpy, but, we want to make sure that you can still fulfill those dreams and live out the life that you deserve.
Yeah. I know also you mentioned that sometimes this is more of a typical situation, delaying Social Security. The reason delaying Social Security often shows this effect is the amount you're taking it is going to be higher when you hit 70. And especially you'll see that effect if you're using the retirement smile or the age-based plan. So basically every dollar of inflation adjusted pension you can add results in more than $1 of current spending. But as you mentioned, that doesn't mean that that's always the right thing to do, Jason. So I just wanted to point out a place where you might see that. So for example, these folks have fairly similar primary insurance amount, but if I made one of these folks have less than half of the PIA, then, and let's go ahead and move this in a little bit. Now you'll see, okay, waiting till 70, break even not possible for John, meaning don't delay. Why? Because starting in May of 2028, the benefit would be the same. So there's no reason to give up a point there. In fact, for him, taking it quite a bit earlier is probably going to be better, because no matter what, he's going to get a raise when Mary starts. There are some points where it might be too early for him to take. Well, this is in the past, right? But so you can use these sliders to explore those situations. So it looks like for him, starting this month is not a bad idea. And then you have a bunch of periods where break even is just not a good idea. So yeah, basically he should start as soon as possible is what we're seeing. So good point on that. No rules of thumb apply to everyone.
And that reminds me, Justin, of our question we had a few weeks ago, and that was regarding the 4% rule. and the video we shot here yesterday that I think is gonna be available to folks. And when you think about, kind of that retirement smile, it just reminds me with the idea that clients want to have a certain degree of income. They don't necessarily care how they get the income. They just want to know that that income is going to be consistent. And then this allows us as professionals to determine, okay, what is really optimal with that Social Security for the election ages, the combinations, what's optimal around pensions, and, how do we really deliver what we have, ultimately conveyed to our clients and to make the most tax efficient decisions possible. And I don't think I've mentioned this before, but the whole reason I was interested in Income Lab was the distribution strategies, the tax planning. I'm going to stop there because I get really excited about it. I know that's what's to come over the next couple of weeks, but that was the reason we signed up for Income Lab, and the retirement GPS was really a bonus. And what we've learned is ultimately the driving factor in what clients enjoy the most.
Yeah, on that, we'll release that video. I think that's slated for next week, but we do address the question that sometimes we get from clients, which is somebody might come in with some, they've done some Googling basically, and they come in saying, I'm supposed to take 4%. This is actually a really good visual to show them that that's very simplistic and not appropriate to simply apply to every situation. So here's, here we're taking, 19,000 plus in portfolio withdrawals early on, then it's dropping, 19,000, times 12 is much more than 4% of their current balance, but that's okay because life is complicated and we don't apply rules of thumb to every situation.
Yeah, back of the napkin calculations, you don't need an advisor for that, right?
Yeah, if that really were what you were supposed to do, no one would be a retirement advisor. So, let's get to the next step here, which, as I mentioned, is creating a tax smart plan. We're going to have 2 sessions on this, okay? But I do want to just give everybody one tool right now that we're going to be using in those 2 sessions, and it actually could be useful even if you're not doing tax planning. It's a step that's really important to understand, which is so far we've been talking about building retirement plans by asking the question, what can I spend? And all of this, the things we've been doing up to this point depend on asking the question that way. Given my resources, what can I spend? Given my resources and my specified goals, what else can I spend? And it's a really great way to evaluate those scenarios. And by the way, if there are scenario planning situations that you would like us to cover, session 6 is going to be all sorts of examples. So please submit those, and we'll choose some. But there are situations where you have already determined what a decent net of tax spending level is that you could target. And Income Lab allows you to change the question for a plan. We call it the primary question, the plan's primary question, from how much can I spend to how can I spend my target amount net of tax. As I said, if you just build a plan in Income Lab, by default, it's asking how much can I spend. This is a great way to begin kind of a discovery phase of retirement planning, exploring options, and so on. It is, although you can show it in net and gross of tax, and I'll show you how to do that here. So I can go to this little tool menu is your friend. This is kind of a advisor tools for the display, right? So I can show net of tax, but we often get a question, why would you ever show gross of tax at all? Isn't net of tax all that really matters? And I would answer that a couple ways. One is, no, actually, at least in the United States and in a lot of countries, people think of their income in gross of tax terms. If you were so, uncouth as to ask someone how much they make, they would answer you in gross of tax terms, right? That is just what they would say. They would never give it to you in net terms. So people do think of their income in gross of tax. The other reason that's really important is actually your income is gross of tax, and then the tax system determines what your net is. So if the tax system changes, your net will change, but your gross won't. So an IRA will support a certain amount of withdrawals. It doesn't care what your tax rate is. It could be 0, it could be 50%. Either way, the withdrawals it supports are the same. Same goes for your pension and so on. So gross is an important feature. However, in retirement, especially early in retirement, we will often see things being particularly lumpy. That could be because you're doing Roth conversions. That could be because you're selling a business or a house, or you're buying a house and you have to take a bunch of money from an IRA or something. So there can be lumpiness. And so that's where how can I spend some target net of tax can be really helpful in order to not change the amount you're spending for all time, but just to gross up your income, your gross income in those years where you need a little extra. So the idea would be if you're, I don't know, buying a house and, paying for it from an IRA may not be a great idea, but let's say you're doing it. It's not that, oh, we're going to buy the house and eat ramen noodles that year. No, let's continue our normal consumption plus buy the house. So the place to do that, there's a couple spots, but probably the best is I go to the expenses tab and I have established a desired baseline spending amount. And I can see, hey, the plan's primary question is how much can I spend? Let's change that to, I don't know why that says that, but it's not, and now it should answer that question. It'll be, I don't know why the 12 is not showing up here. That must be an issue with my UI. So it'll target 12,435 in net of tax income. So shifting over to you, Jason, this is definitely an advanced setting, and we'll be covering it a lot more in our next session and tax planning and so on. But let me just ask you, if you were using this, how would you talk us through how you would choose kind of a target, a net of tax spending level that you would use in a place like this?
Well, number one, I start with how much can I spend? That's absolutely the first place to start, which would give you a range of kind of the spending levels. And then, as you think about, how can I spend X net of tax? There's really two main times. That's going to be anytime there's that lumpiness, which you referred to and referenced, especially early in a plan, say kind of that first 10 years, if you will. That's when, maybe we're executing Roth conversions, we've got lumpy income due to maybe an asset sale, or maybe there's an expense like paying for a wedding, so on and so forth. So that's typically when we would take that approach.
Yeah. And the place where you can, just to remind people, I'm going to go back to a how much can I spend plan and share this. A good place where you can get a feel for that is here. I mean, really, we're this is right in the middle. Net, we're at 16,000. You can look at a range of spending. Here it's kind of between 16 and 18,000 a month, right? So this is already telling you, even net, right? If we're talking, maybe it's 10, 20% effective tax rate, probably 10, 15. We're not going to be recommending that these folks spend 50,000 a month, right? That's going to be out of bounds. And on the other hand, if they are expecting 6,000, obviously they can afford that, but it's well within their means. And now there might be some opportunities for the kinds of things Jason was talking about, like, talking them through, gifting at, the best times and so on. So just to wrap up on this, well, again, we're going to be covering this a lot 3 weeks from now, but especially going to use that, how can I spend? It's not typically your first step as we saw, the first steps are, build a resources plan, build a core plan, do scenario planning. It's typically after that or around that period where you might start doing some targeting of a specific plan. The other place where you might find a need for this is if you're using LifeHub a lot with a client, and if that client really just wants to see all the numbers match up perfectly. So kind of the engineer type client, because in LifeHub, if you're doing a, how much can I spend plan, the baseline expenses that you have are not, they're not defining how much you will spend. This is just, again, this is just kind of a way to list some stuff in a plan. When you're asking how much can I spend, the software is answering the question, how much can you spend? So in this case is a good example. It's saying, look, you can afford 242. Your total expenses that you've told us about are 198. So there's a surplus. And that's fine. You're really just saying you would be living well within your means if you did this, right? But sometimes a client would prefer to just see all the numbers match up perfectly. And so in that case, using, targeting, more the 198, or in this case, the 149 in baseline expenses would be the way to go. Okay. Last couple steps here before we get to the meat of the second part of today are just wrapping up the plan, any, kind of final pieces. So I call this a complete plan. So you've done your resources plan, you've done your core plan, you've done scenario planning, you've done tax smart distribution planning. Maybe you've switched to target a specific net level. Okay, now we kind of add in the, like color in the edges, essentially. So if you need to add a little bit, some baseline expenses, things like that, that completes the plan. So embellishing the baseline expenses, making it kind of polished and ready to go. And at that point, you are, you've probably been talking with the client quite a bit about scenarios, options, and so on, but you're going to be choosing a plan to actually implement and monitor. So this piece, which is one of our takeaways for today, is a way to kind of walk a client through the process of retirement income planning in this way. And I guess at this point, I would say, Jason, this last step, this step of implementing and monitoring, first of all, when would you do this? At what point in somebody's life are you doing this, before retirement, at retirement, in retirement?
Yeah, the implementation is really at retirement, right? That's kind of the go live date. But to give clients a sense and to set the expectation, I know we've talked about the formula before, happiness equals reality minus expectations. As retirees, they have a lot of fear and anxiety, and there's just this unknown of these uncharted waters when they do retire. So to give them a taste and a flavor of what the guardrail system looks like and what their spending capacity would be, I will demonstrate and show them, here are your resources, here's the capacity, and ultimately here are those guardrails, top guardrail, bottom guardrail. And as your portfolio fluctuates up or down, this would be the influence to your spending capacity. And so it's really just being a guide with them on their journey versus just giving them a map to use themselves. And ultimately just kind of talking through different sorts of adjustments that could be made, the cadence of updates. And then of course, you can use the retirement stress test to show them how their portfolio would have performed, what their income, their spending capacity would have been, and the changes that would have been suggested due to maybe the great financial crisis, or maybe the stagflation period, or a number of other dot-com bubbles, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to use the retirement stress test for setting the expectations. one thing just consistently psychologically. All of us, we just connect better with a story than we do with a statistic. I love math and statistics, but the stories just stick with me a lot more. So being able to show them, hey, for example, what kind of things might you be able to expect? Okay, in this one, we would have made an adjustment in 09. Why? Because we would have hit the lower guardrail. But then by 2014, we would have had a raise, we would have had more raises and so on. And then again in 2022, we would have pulled back from that higher raise. I think that's a great way to go. Also, as you talked about, you want to set them up for size and cadence of these adjustments, right? So what sorts of things might lead to an adjustment and how big could they be? I think that's a great.
And that's oftentimes a shocker. I will admit, oftentimes a shocker when you evaluate the resources, the balances in their portfolio, the fluctuations that could occur up or down, and then how that correlates with their income. And when we review these scenarios, historical scenarios, usually it's quite eye-opening. And it gives them this confidence. It gives clients this confidence that, okay, gosh, retirement is maybe a little less anxious. And maybe these unknowns, I'm not as fearful as I originally thought.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk through a little bit of what's happening when you set a plan to be monitored. So all the work we did so far was about designing options, exploring, and so on. Once we are in the monitor phase, the one key thing to understand as an advisor is you're no longer asking the question, what can I spend? And you're not even asking, how do I spend, $10,000 net of tax? Instead, at this phase, you're now asking, should I change anything? Because the default is no, keep doing what you're doing. I like to joke that clients want you to keep them on track, make sure that they're good, but they also want you to leave them alone and let them live their life, right? So we don't want, a call from our advisor every day or every month, adjusting things just tiny bits. And so that's why we use guardrails. It's kind of a behavioral piece of just like, hey, go live your life. We'll let you know when there's enough of a change that it's worth making an adjustment. I know the other nice thing, Jason, we talked about this in the first session, was just scalability. Because once you set a plan to be monitored in Income Lab, that's called implementing a plan, it's happening automatically in the background. You don't actually have to do anything. It's just done. And this is another question we get a lot is, how often are you communicating with clients about how they're doing, where their guardrails are, and so on? Is that something you're doing all the time? Or did you kind of maintain your normal cadence of meetings?
Yeah, so one thing I want to add here is, we segment our client book, and we have kind of a meeting series, and we meet with the majority of our clients. We call them wealth plans. We don't use the term review. Review is looking in the rearview mirror. Planning is about looking forward. We don't want to focus on what's happened in the past. We want to focus on what we're expecting in the future and how they can live their life in the future. And so we do meet basically every 6 months. And the way that we function within our practice is during those wealth plans, we really talk about the resources, we talk about the spending capacity, and oftentimes most of our clients are underspending. Justin, you referenced that just a few moments ago. Maybe their spending capacity is 20,000 and they're only spending 6. Those conversations can be really revealing, really eye-opening. And so how do we help our clients understand the potential of their wealth and to allow themselves to give themselves permission to spend some of their dollars and to give them confidence? And that's where we really talk a lot about, kind of, you've got a life expectancy and then you have a health expectancy. And your lifespan and your health span hopefully run in sequence to one another, but we know of folks who have passed away too soon, or maybe had ailments at a young life, and it really derailed their retirement. And so we have those conversations intentionally. That way it's in the back of our clients' minds. But the reality is there has to be a trigger moment for them as individuals to truly understand, okay, life is short. Tomorrow isn't guaranteed. I just had a meeting yesterday with a couple clients. They've been retired for about 7 years, and the husband went into AFib and had a heart issue, had a health scare. And our conversation yesterday was much around, gosh, we've got these bucket list items that we've been delaying, that we haven't scheduled these trips to Europe, to Antarctica, to Iceland. And we're gonna structure those. We're gonna schedule those. And we're able to run kind of that advanced scenario to show, okay, here's your spending capacity. Here's this goal that you have. You can absolutely pursue that goal. And it is not going to result in derailment of your financial plan. And the reality is there's still going to be money left over at end of plan as you pursue those goals. So, I go back to the idea that, there's oftentimes a textbook answer when we're guiding clients. And that textbook answer, clients are not necessarily comfortable with. And clients have their own psychological answer. So our job as advisors is to help them get as comfortable as possible to follow the textbook, while still being able to lay their head down at night and get what's called return on sleep. As advisors, so often we talk about return on investment, ROI, ROI, ROI. It's valuable. That's important. But at the end of the day, if our clients can't lay their head down at night, it doesn't really matter what the ROI is. We need to make sure they get return on sleep. And that's where it just brings this entire, retirement GPS full circle. Because you've got resources, you've got spending capacity. We lay out our income structure, optimal time, Social Security, pensions, various goals. And then ultimately we tell our clients to go live their life. And sure, we meet every two times a year, and we've got calls in between based on size of clients. We might call them 6 times in addition to those wealth plans, plus a birthday call, plus an anniversary call. But those calls they're personal in nature. They really are. Because with the GPS, your plan is set. And until we hit one of those guardrails, until one of those alerts fires, you get to live your life. And that's rewarding, that's empowering. And that's what our clients really like the most. So I don't know that I addressed your question, Justin, but I wanted to fill in, what I'm thinking about as an advisor and kind of how I deliver to clients. And I just think it's so valuable. So take away. Go ahead.
I think you did. I think you did. No, that was great. That was great.
I haven't coined ROS, return on sleep. So go ahead and use that. But it seems to resonate really well with clients.
So I that gets back to, the permission to spend piece, permission to go live your life without fear and so on that we were talking about in the first session as well. So as I said, once you set a plan to be implemented, and by the way, to implement a plan, you just go to this little 3-dot menu and hit implement. What happens then is it's no longer asking, what can I spend? It's asking, should I change something? Should I change what I spend? And so if you have an implemented plan, it's being monitored. Basically, this dotted line is going to be going up and down, getting closer to one of these guardrails over time. And you can see that happen in the retirement stress test is a great place to do that. And we actually have a new feature coming out as well that will show you the actual history of an implemented plan and where it was with respect to guardrails over time. So the question that we often get then is, okay, great, I'm going to be getting nearer or farther away from guardrails. What is causing that to happen? Or what could lead to a change, I guess. So, you're just chugging along, hopefully your client's living their life. And then at some point on one of those 6-month, meetings or whatever your structure is as a practice, there may be a change. And there are really 3 types of changes you could see in Income Lab. Inflation adjustments, so really just a COLA, cost of living adjustment, a change in the mix of income, or hitting a guardrail. An inflation adjustment is exactly what it sounds like. So this is actually a visual from that new feature that's coming out. This is the plan history for this particular account. The plan was implemented in 2021. You see they hit an upper guardrail here. And then these blue ones are just inflation adjustments. You can see in the background, if I was doing, inflation adjustments every month, just keeping up with CPI, I would have this light blue line. Well, we're not going to do that, right? I mean, that's just silly. So we're waiting until the adjustment, in this case, is at least 5%. So you can see, okay, now I'm behind inflation. Oh, okay, let's jump back up, right? That's an inflation adjustment. It's easy. We're tracking CPI for you, so we'll let you know when an inflation adjustment would be a good idea. A change in the mix of income. So maybe a pension starts, maybe a Social Security starts, maybe another Social Security starts. Okay, well, that doesn't actually change your income, but it does change how you're making it up. And so time to make it, it's just an administrative change to the withdrawals. We'll let you know about that as well. And then hitting a guardrail. This is where people really wonder, okay, yeah, great, but what causes you to hit a guardrail? Inflation being higher or lower than expected, returns being higher or lower than expected, withdrawals or additions to the account being higher or lower than expected, and just time passing, right? So think about it this way. In these folks are spending $11,300. If they still have $2 million 10 years from now, that 11,300 is a lot less risky than it was, 10 years before, right? Because they're funding a shorter lifespan. So any of those things, it's the combination of all of them that give you the guardrails and that cause you to hit one of them. So it's not necessarily one thing. It'll depend on the plan itself. So I think we've covered really most of what we planned to today. So we have some time for questions.
Justin, if you don't mind, maybe before we jump into, because I know we've talked about this before, I think the audience will appreciate, just some maybe best practices around kind of client meetings during a review. Like, what do I cover? What do
Great.
you cover as an advisor? So, as I think about that, I always lead off a meeting, and I'll just ask them, what's your top priority that we need to address today? Or if you want to get a little more creative, I'll use a phrase and say, what do I need to cover today? So when you two get in your car, you look at each other and you say, that's the best meeting we've ever had. So, we've all rode to meetings with our spouse and we always have, kind of that debrief after a meeting. And how can we provide a really impactful takeaway to really empower our clients? So I will ask that question and it just kind of sets up the visual of, gosh, okay, what would make this meeting really impactful? But as we go through the course of the meeting, we really talk about lifestyle needs. How's their income feel currently? Specifically based on inflation, what we've seen recently with the cost of goods, cost of gas, cost of groceries. And so it's definitely impacting people's lives, whether it's impacting their income directly and them feeling comfortable or uncomfortable, they still like to talk about it. And they like to hear that it's being acknowledged. And they likely have friends or family that have been impacted. So they like to talk about inflation and kind of how it feels now that their grocery bill is, 150% of the cost today than what it was in 2020. We also talk about the income sources, which you just kind of showed that staggered look. If we need 10,000 in income, where are we generating income from, whether it's Social Security, whether it's pension? And a best practice to really lay out there is, if a client if they're early in retirement, Social Security hasn't kicked in yet, and they're generating 10,000 from distributions, it's important for them to understand that, hey, when Social Security kicks in, we're going to offset your distribution dollar for dollar. You're still going to get the 10,000. We're just going to be withdrawing less from your portfolio. We're going to lean less heavily on your assets. So that's valuable. And then also reviewing just kind of those top and bottom guardrails. so that they understand when income adjustments would trigger or would occur. And then last but not least, which is definitely my favorite part, which is the tax planning, the Roth conversions, the tax savings. And ultimately we talk about, I think we're all willing to pay our fair share to the government, but we aren't looking to tip. And based on the current strategy, it does appear you're tipping the government. Is that by design, or should we look at a different approach? Which I know, once again, I'm getting ahead of us here, but a couple of weeks, we're going to jump into that.
Now yeah, I think I had intended to ask exactly that. Like, what are you going to cover in a meeting like that? So that's perfect. And actually, we have a few questions that are on these topics. So maybe I'll just ask them or cover them.
Mhm.
How often are you checking this for clients? Each month? Are you updating things monthly? Or is there some other cadence?
Yeah, so we use the integration tool, and we ultimately use the alerts for being checked. So that's the scalability piece. Yeah, we tried to automate the best we can, and that's the way we've done it in the past.
Yeah,
So we
and I
really
think
rely on
that is
the
a best
alerts, we
practice.
rely on the income lab.
Yeah, so if you can do integrations, that's best. If you don't have integrations, the software will use your target allocation and look at indexes and say, okay, how did those do? And let's guess which way this went. So you still don't necessarily have to check it every month. You said you do every 6-month meetings. That's probably plenty. And I can share quickly here how to do a, let's see. So if you have an implemented plan, and let me see if I've got one that does. No, I don't, unfortunately. So if I implemented this plan, I would have an option here on the implemented plan. I'd have one that says reconcile, and that will allow me to just do a quick. I think of it like balancing your checkbook. If you don't have integrations, maybe it says that $100,000 IRA, we think it's worth 110,000, but it's actually 112. Okay, just do a quick, just change that up, reconcile the plan. So you still can use this if not all of your accounts have an integration that'll give it to you. But yeah, basically once a month at the beginning of the month, we are updating the plans. We're stepping it forward 1 month in time, right? So now you're a month older, you're a month closer to Social Security, you're a month closer to long-term care, you're walking down that retirement smile, all that stuff's happening. And you have new account balances. We know what happened with inflation, all of that. And somebody asked that, they said, still a little fuzzy on what exactly implementing a plan is. What you're doing when you implement a plan is you're saying, hey, software, do all that work for me. Update the plan completely as much as you possibly can, and then let me know if it's calling for any changes. Because again, an implemented plan, unlike the designed plan, is not asking what can I spend, it's asking, should I change what I spend? And as Jason said, it's not necessarily if it's calling for a pay cut, you may decide there are other changes to the plan to make. You're going to start looking at priorities and really this is not sort of, okay, let's mechanically just do whatever the computer says. What it's telling you is good time to have a conversation.
Mhm.
Is that $1 million legacy goal for when I die, is that really as important as I thought it was? Let's see. Right, that's the kind of thing that happens if you hit a guardrail.
And let's say, Justin, that we've got some volatility in the market. We hit a lower guardrail, and it does recommend reducing income. What we've found is most clients naturally tighten up their purse strings in a down market. It's not that we have to encourage them to do so. More times than not, they actually want to tighten their purse strings even more so than what the software is recommending. And so the conversation is more about the markets and the speed in which markets recover and the strength of their plan and how they can weather this storm, and still giving them the confidence to continue to pursue their dreams, even though we are in a down market, to make sure that they're not making unnecessary sacrifices in spending and tighten up the purse strings even more than they should.
Right. Yeah, that global financial crisis example I was showing before, that was actually a relatively aggressive plan. But even so, its adjustment, its recommended adjustment, it might have been less than what they had already done just by, kind of clamming up in that situation. COVID's an interesting example because, many people had to cancel vacations and things. So really the spending was cut for them, whether they liked it or not. So another good example. Somebody asked, how does the monitoring and alert system work? Because you mentioned, or you just depend on that. That does not go out to clients. That is just advisors. You get an email every month when the updates are done. And in the app itself, you'll see, or I'll share what that looks like. So I did go ahead and implement this, but this one has an implemented plan. You would see one that says needs attention, and up here you'd see how many need attention. You'd go there and it'll tell you, hey, this is what happened. It's calling for a cost of living adjustment, or hey, it looks like Social Security started, so we just got to change our withdrawal amount, or more interestingly, you've hit a guardrail, and here's the recommended or what the plan is calling for in terms of adjustment. So this is all totally, advisor oriented. And as Jason said, it's not necessarily though, you got to drop everything and call the client that day. A normal cadence is fine. That's the great thing about retirement, is that things actually happen relatively slowly. So no 1 month of spending is probably gonna, undo somebody's plan. All right, let's see some other plans here. Or some other questions.
One thing I would throw out there is, I think a lot of advisors, I know I've been this way before, I was kind of fearful to deliver bad news. Not to the degree where I climb under my desk or anything like that, but I'd get, maybe my heart, it would get up a little bit if I had to deliver kind of a difficult conversation. So when I'm meeting with clients, I talk about our relationship being a marriage. And that might sound unusual, right? And I'll even acknowledge that, you being married to your advisor, but my understanding of a marriage is communication is incredibly important. And we really need to have a two-way line of communication. And that communication sometimes can involve some difficult conversations, some uncomfortable conversations. But those uncomfortable conversations help us get better, they help us improve, and they help us stay on track. And so I just give them permission to deliver difficult news to me when they're thinking of it. And I ask for their permission for me to do the same in a very candid way, in a respectful way. But that communication is really important. So then by having that kind of phraseology early in the relationship, and often when they do get a call as it relates to a down market in their portfolio, potentially hit a guardrail, it's not as intrusive. Had you not planted that seed, had you not had that early conversation and set the stage for what to expect.
This kind of gets to a question that that we've also gotten before, which is, well, my clients don't want to adjust or things like that. In your experience, has that been an issue? No,
I have had it happen. Absolutely. Yeah. And that conversation was with a client that had a high level of spending needs. And ultimately they didn't feel that they could cut back. And so we had to monitor the plan appropriately. And it just involved a few more touch points. Just from a compliance standpoint on my own side, as well as a comfort standpoint for the client.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of these plans are going to start out actually relatively conservative. So if we go back to that concept from the first session of what's the most likely amount you can spend, right? If you were just no emotion, I want the, the square on the roulette wheel, or the square, that I would on the craps table, I'm going to put my money on. Well, you just go with the 50th percentile. You'd go the one where you're equally likely to be overspending or underspending. most people are actually building in a buffer, which is why this red guardrail is so far away from the green here, right? You're saying, hey, I want to start out spending so that things could get quite a bit worse before I have to make a change. That's what this is really saying. So you're kind of leaning into our risk aversion, loss aversion, right? Maybe again, a person with ice in their veins could spend a lot more and just take their lumps if they had to. So you're saying in some situations, maybe you've got more of a spendthrift or someone who has, expectations that are a little too high. They will just be spending already closer to needing to make a change, and you just have to deal with those situations as they come.
And, ultimately it was a deep rooted psychology of why this individual didn't want to change. He had a decent relationship with his grandparents, but he wanted to have a much better relationship with his grandkids. And trips that they take together, entertainment that they pursue together. He flies all over the country to see his grandkids, and that's admirable. It really is. And so you can't fault the person for that. We just have to understand that there are pros and cons. If we have this fixed income and we absolutely want to pursue these goals, no matter what the markets provide us, just understand there is a marriage between your resources and your spending capacity. And if you're comfortable with spending less later in life because you are healthy now and tomorrow isn't guaranteed, let's go in knowing that. And let's talk through those details. And clients just want to be understood at the end of the day. And market volatility, we grow numb to that as advisors because we deal with it every day. And, we have a very clear-cut expectation and belief that the markets are going to recover. But clients don't have that belief. They don't have that same expectation. So that's our job from a behavior finance standpoint, from a psychology finance standpoint, to really know our clients. And to help them navigate these difficult times and psychological times.
Right. We did have a question. You mentioned you implement plans, start monitoring them at retirement. Somebody asked, well, what would happen if you did it before then? Just so everybody understands, if you implement a plan before retirement, that's fine. What you're doing is you're asking the software to automatically update the spending capacity and guardrails for you. So before retirement, it's not asking, should I change? It's still asking, what can I spend? So it's just like automatically updating what can I spend. And so as you approach retirement, you're going to zero in on what the real spending level will be. So it's perfectly fine to implement a plan before that, but just so you understand, everything we've been talking about hitting a guardrail and so on, that is only in retirement. You really can't ask, should I change my retirement spending if you're not yet, retired.
And Jason, just a question on that. Do you implement prior to retirement or just as they approach retirement?
At retirement. Yeah, it's more setting the stage and giving them a taste of the software so they're introduced. That way it's not a complete 180 moving from one software to another.
All right, we have so many questions. It's we're definitely going to be making some videos to get some of these taken care of. So look for those in your emails. Also, please check out the website that we have for this masterclass. There are lots of takeaways and things that you can download, things that you can use for marketing on social media. A piece like this that you could use with clients if you're talking with them about your process. Lots of stuff there, along with videos of recordings of these sessions, as well as we do these Q&A recordings. We'll put those up there. We've done a few sort of bonus pieces as well. We did something on the regret zone and the retirement smile that I think you'll like. I'm talking with people about the subject Jason mentioned about health span and lifespan and spending while you're when you're around and it matters most. So please check out all of that, and we hope to see everyone in 3 weeks when we dive into Jason's favorite topic, tax smart distribution planning, which is a great area, very rich, lots of value for clients. So please join us then. And with that, thank you, Jason, and thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you.